Guilty. That is the only word that matters in this room. But in 1996, the path to that word isn't paved with high-definition digital evidence or instant cloud-based data. It is a path carved through stacks of physical paper, grainy VHS tapes, and the low-frequency hum of cathode ray tube monitors. Look at her. The local media has spent months calling her cold. They call her a materialistic monster who traded her child's life for a chance to clear her ledger. But right now, to the 12 men and women in that jury box, she just looks like a mother who has lost everything. The image is of a 6-year-old's bedroom, a pile of colorful plastic blocks, a single unmade bed, and a dark, jagged stain on the carpet that the camera flash has turned a sickly shade of purple. Before we go any deeper into the shadows of this 1996 mystery, I want to check in with the community. Where are you watching from today? What time is it in your city? And what is the weather like outside your window right now? Drop a comment below. I love seeing how far the search for justice reaches. If you are ready to uncover the truth behind a mother's dark secret, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. You will want to be here for every second of this investigation. This is the silly string video. It is the prosecution's most powerful weapon. We see a gravesite in Rowlett. It is a hot Texas afternoon, just 10 days after 6-year-old Leo Reed was buried. Most mothers would be collapsed in grief. But Evelyn Reed is there with a can of bright neon foam. She is laughing. She is spraying the headstone, cheering as if she is at a birthday party instead of a place of eternal rest. To the public watching the evening news, this was whack. It was trippin'. It didn't fit the picturesque, no, let's call it the manicured image of a grieving suburban mother. It suggested a woman who was all that and a bag of chips on the outside, but hollow on the inside. But the law doesn't care about vibes. The law cares about special circumstances. In the state of Texas in 1996, for a murder to be elevated to a capital offense, the kind that carries the ultimate penalty, the prosecution has to prove more than just the act. They have to prove a motive that is twice as dark. For Evelyn, the state has filed 2 specific aggravating factors: murder for financial gain and the murder of a child under the age of 6. The financial gain? A life insurance policy worth $250,000. The debt? $80,000 in illegal gambling losses. This jury has been death qualified. That means every single person sitting in those swivel chairs has stated, under oath, that they are willing to consider the death penalty as a viable sentence. They are looking at Evelyn, and they are looking at the CRT monitors, trying to decide if the woman in the floral blazer is a victim of a random home invasion or the architect of a blood-paid settlement. The prosecution's theory is simple. Evelyn Reed was a woman in the ketchup operating at a massive deficit. She was a regular at the local taverns, feeding $20 bills into video gambling machines until her bank accounts were cactus dead and finished. She didn't just want the insurance money. She needed it to stop the beeping of her alphanumeric pager. She needed it to pay a man named Mickey, a bookie who didn't take no for an answer. But there is a rule that stands in her way, a rule that existed long before the 90s and will exist long after. It is called the Slayer Rule. It is the legal principle that says a person cannot profit from a death they caused. If the insurance company can prove, even without a criminal conviction, that Evelyn had a hand in Leo's death, that $250,000 vanishes. The detectives didn't just walk into a crime scene that night in March. They walked into a staged theater. They found a screen door cut from the inside. They found a 32-inch Sony Trinitron television left untouched. And they found a mother with a superficial neck wound that missed her vital arteries by exactly 2 millimeters. This isn't just a story about a crime. It is a story about the intersection of greed, addiction, and the forensic linchpin that would eventually tear this family apart. As we move out of the courtroom and back to that rainy night in March 1996, remember, in this era, the truth isn't always found in a database. Sometimes it is hidden in the tracking lines of a VHS tape. Rowlett, Texas, is the kind of place where people move to escape the noise of Dallas. It is a land of manicured lawns and two-car garages. But at 2:31 in the morning, the silence of Eagle Drive is shattered by a call that will haunt the local 911 dispatchers for decades. Evelyn Reed's voice is a jagged wire. She is on a corded kitchen landline, screaming that someone is in the house. She says a man in a black mask cut his way through the utility room screen. She says he has a knife. She says he's in the room with the boys. When the officers burst through the front door, the air inside the house is static charged. They find Evelyn in the hallway, clutching her throat. Her white nightshirt is stained a deep, wet crimson. In the living room, her 6-year-old son, Leo, is lying on the floor. The intruder is gone. Detective James Cron arrives 20 minutes later. He is a veteran of the old school of Texas, policing a man who believes the house always tells the truth, even when the people inside it are lying. He steps over the bloodstains and begins a slow, methodical walkthrough of the crime scene. Detective Cron stops. He looks at the television. In 1996, a Trinitron of this size is a luxury item, a fat piece of tech worth thousands. Beside it sits a stack of CD-ROMs and a high-end stereo system. If this was a burglary gone wrong, why was the most valuable portable equipment in the house still sitting right there? He moves to the utility room. This is where Evelyn says the monster entered her home. He examines the screen door. This is the first glitch in Evelyn's story. When a screen is cut from the outside, the fine wire mesh curls inward toward the house. But the mesh on the Reed's door is curling outward toward the backyard. The screen hadn't been breached to get in. It had been cut to create the appearance of an exit. I have to ask, does this feel like a mother's nightmare or a carefully built set? While you think about that, take a moment to look at your clock. What time is it there right now? Is it the middle of the night like it was for Leo Reed? Or are you watching this in the bright light of day? Let me know in the comments. Detective Cron heads to the hospital to interview Evelyn. He finds her sitting on a gurney, her neck wrapped in gauze. The emergency room doctor pulls the detective aside and whispers something that changes the direction of the entire night. The wound to Evelyn's throat is a thin, horizontal line. It is superficial. It missed her carotid artery by exactly 2 millimeters. In the doctor's experience, when an intruder wants to kill you, they don't stop 2 millimeters short of the finish line. This was a hesitation wound, a wound often seen in individuals who are trying to stage a patsy to take the fall for their own actions. Back at the house, the technicians are pulling the phone records from the landline and seizing a small plastic device from the nightstand, Evelyn's alphanumeric pager. As the sun begins to rise over Rowlett, the detectives aren't looking for a man in a black mask anymore. They are looking for the motive. And in 1996, the motive is usually written in the green, glowing numbers of a beeper code. Detective Cron stared at that pager for a long time. In 1996, these little boxes were the digital pulse of suburban America. Most people used them to tell their spouse to pick up milk or to let a friend know they were running late. But for Evelyn Reed, that green screen was a scoreboard for a game she was losing. As the detective watched, the pager buzzed against the metal tray. A new message scrolled across. 343-187-80000. In the 90s, 343 was common beeper slang for call back now, and 187, That was the police code for a homicide. It was a message that meant, "Call me back now, or you are dead." And the final 5 digits told the detectives exactly what the life of Evelyn's son was worth to the person on the other end: $80,000. Stories like this remind us that the people we trust most can hold the darkest secrets. If this story is gripping you, leave a word in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The search for the intruder led the police away from Eagle Drive and into a local tavern just 3 miles away. This wasn't a high-end casino in Las Vegas. This was convenience gambling, a phenomenon that was weaponized in the mid-90s to target the suburban middle class. Evelyn Reed had become a ghost in her own home, while her husband, David, thought she was working late at the real estate office. She was sitting in a padded chair in front of a video gambling machine. These devices were designed with cue-sensitive triggers, creating a craving-driven addiction that could bypass a person's moral compass in a matter of months. The bar owner told detectives that Evelyn was a regular. She would feed $20 bills into the machine until her fingers were stained with the ink from the cash. When her savings were cactus completely finished, she didn't stop. She started writing bad checks. In 1996, 75% of people spiraling into a gambling debt resorted to writing hot checks or paying bills from accounts that were already empty. But Evelyn's debt wasn't to the bank. It was to Mickey. Mickey was a sheet holder, an illegal bookmaker who operated with the cold efficiency of a Fortune 500 company. He provided credit to gamblers like Evelyn, allowing them to bet thousands over the wire through phone calls and pager codes. Mickey didn't care about the 2-year contestability period of a life insurance policy. He didn't care about the Slayer rule. He only cared about the $80,000 he was owed. By March 1996, Mickey's messages were no longer "just kidding." The 187 code on her pager wasn't just a threat, it was an ultimatum. Detectives realized that Evelyn was being squeezed by a professional organization, but as they looked closer at her, bank records obtained through a newly launched federal system called a suspicious activity report, they saw that she had been preparing for this settlement for weeks. She had been smurfing. Every few days, she would visit a different bank branch in Rowlett, depositing exactly $2,900. She kept the amounts low to avoid triggering a currency transaction report, which only applied to cash transactions over $10,000. But why was she depositing cash if she was $80,000 in the hole? The answer was hidden in a manila folder at the Texas Mutual Insurance office. 17 days before the intruder allegedly broke into her home, Evelyn had taken out a high-value policy on Leo. She had paid the first 3 months of premiums in cash money she had likely stolen from her husband's secret business account. She was in the catch-up, operating at a massive deficit. And in her mind, the only way to pay Mickey and save her own life was to trade Leo's life for a $250,000 payout. As the sun hit the 20-inch CRT monitors in the police station, Detective Cron realized the most terrifying truth of the case. The man in the black mask wasn't a stranger. The monster was the woman sitting in the hospital bed, clutching a superficial wound and waiting for the mail to bring her a check for a debt paid in blood. In 1996, forensic science was entering a revolutionary new age. We were moving past simple blood typing and into the era where biological evidence became the definitive linchpin of a case. The evidence that finally broke Evelyn's story wasn't a witness or a confession. It was the geometry of guilt found in the bloodstains on her own clothes. The prosecution brought in an expert in bloodstain pattern analysis. He stood before the jury and pointed to a series of dark, elliptical spots on the back of Evelyn's right shoulder. These were cast-off stains. The expert explained that cast-off occurs when blood is flung from a swinging object. For these droplets to land on the back of Evelyn's shoulder, she had to be the one swinging the knife. She had raised the weapon over her head as she withdrew it from each strike, flinging the blood behind her. If she were truly a victim lying on the floor being attacked by a stranger, it would be physically impossible for those specific patterns to exist on the back of her shirt. The geometry didn't lie. Then came the DNA. In 1996, the primary tool for forensic identification was the polymerase chain reaction, or PCR technique. This allowed investigators to take minute trace samples of biological material, so small they were invisible to the naked eye, and amplify them until they had enough DNA to create a profile. The technicians at the state lab amplified the blood found on the nightshirt. It was a perfect match for Leo Reed. But it wasn't just Leo's blood. They found transfer DNA from the handle of the kitchen knife DNA that belonged to Evelyn. The defense argued that a mother's DNA would naturally be on her own kitchen knives, but the prosecution countered with the surgical precision of the attack. Dr. DeMaio testified that the wound to Evelyn's throat was unlike any intruder wound he had seen in his career. It was a clean, horizontal cut. It missed her carotid artery by exactly 2 millimeters. In forensic pathology, this is known as a hesitation wound. It is a hallmark of individuals who are staging a crime or attempting self-harm, but are biologically resistant to the final, lethal pull of the blade. A stranger in a dark hallway, swinging a knife in a frantic struggle, does not stop with such mathematical precision just 2 millimeters from a major artery. The prosecution was building a cage of evidence, bar by bar. The screen door cut from the inside, the untouched 32-inch Sony Trinitron, the $80,000 debt documented on a 1990s pager, and finally, the cast-off blood that proved she was the aggressor. By the time the prosecution rested, the silly string video wasn't just a sign of whack behavior. It was the final frame in a story of a woman who viewed her son's life as a payout for a debt paid in blood. But the most tripping part of this investigation wasn't the evidence the police found. It was the evidence Evelyn thought she had hidden forever. As the trial of Evelyn Reed moved toward its closing arguments, the defense made a final, desperate move. They requested one last search of the Reed family home, which had been sitting in probate for months. They were looking for evidence of a forced entry they had missed. They didn't find a broken window. They found a secret. Hidden in a cavity behind the wall was a small, high-end surveillance camera, a 1996 nanny cam that Evelyn had installed months before the murder. She had suspected David was hiding money from her, and she wanted to catch him. But she had forgotten the tape was still running on that rainy night in March. The jury watched as the man in the black mask entered the room. He did exactly what Evelyn described. He was methodical. He was cold. He moved toward the bed where Leo was sleeping. But then the man stopped. He looked directly at the camera. He pulled off the mask. The courtroom went silent. If this boy was the killer, Evelyn was innocent. But the tape didn't end there. The boy didn't attack Leo. He walked to the window and opened it. He reached out and lifted a small sleeping child into the room from the outside. A child who looked exactly like Leo, but was wearing a different pair of pajamas. Then David Reed walked into the frame. He handed the runaway a stack of cash, $80,000 in bills wrapped in tavern deposit slips. David leaned over and whispered into the boy's ear, and the microphone on the nanny cam caught every word. The insurance company won't check the dental records if the face is unrecognizable. Do it now. The runaway didn't kill Leo Reed. He killed the other boy, a nameless child David and Evelyn had kidnapped from the bus station to serve as a body double. The insane truth was that Leo was still alive. Evelyn and David had plotted to stage Leo's death using a disposable child to collect the $250,000 life insurance payout. They planned to pay Mickey the $80,000 they owed, then flee to Mexico with the real Leo and the remaining cash. But David had a different plan. He had tipped off the police about Evelyn's smurfing and the insurance policy. He wanted her to take the fall. He wanted the $250,000, the real Leo, and his freedom, leaving Evelyn to face the death qualification of a Texas jury alone. The boy in the grave wasn't Leo Reed. He was a runaway whose name the world will never know. And the real Leo? When the police finally tracked David to a motel in Oklahoma, the room was empty. A single alphanumeric pager was sitting on the nightstand. The final message scrolled across the screen. 1023. It's over. The trial of Evelyn Reed didn't end with a clean resolution. It ended with a detonation. When that VHS tape flickered to black on the 20-inch monitors, the state's case against a grieving mother was replaced by something far more sinister. The jury didn't see a woman who had broken under the pressure of an $80,000 debt. They saw a woman who had calculated the value of a human life and found it wanting. The legal fallout was swift, because the geometry of guilt on her nightshirt and the PCR DNA results proved she was the one who swung the knife. The Slayer rule was cemented. Evelyn Reed would never touch a single cent of that $250,000 policy. Instead of a payout, she received a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. But as she was led out of the courtroom in her floral print blazer, the question that hung in the air wasn't about her guilt, it was about her son. This is the part of the story that still keeps investigators up at night. As we wrap up this journey into 1996, I want to hear from you one last time. What time is it where you are right now? Do you think the real Leo Reed is still out there? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. This community is built on your voices. Justice is often a long road, and sometimes the truth is more sinister than fiction. What do you think really happened to the real Leo? Tell me your theories below. I'll see you in the next minute of justice. When the FBI finally tracked David Reed to a roadside motel outside of Tulsa, they found the door kicked open. Inside, the bed was unmade. A half-eaten burger from McDonald's sat on the nightstand next to a stack of tavern deposit slips. The only thing David had left behind was his alphanumeric pager. The detective scrolled through the history. The final message wasn't from a bookie. It wasn't about the $80,000. It was a single code sent from a payphone in Rowlett, just minutes after the verdict was read. 1023. In the secret language of 1996 beepers, that meant one thing. It's over. David Reed vanished into the technological adolescence of the 90s. In an era before facial recognition, before everybody in CODIS, and before the hyper-connected world of the internet, a man with $250,000 in cash and a 6-year-old boy could simply become a ghost. The boy, buried in the Rowlett Cemetery, was eventually identified through a massive search of runaway records. He was a foster child from a neighboring county who had slipped through the cracks of a broken system, a disposable life used to pay a debt he didn't owe. Evelyn Reed remains in a Texas prison today. She still claims she was tripping, that she was in a dissociative state, and doesn't remember the intruder or the boy from the bus station. She says she is all wet, a woman framed by a husband who was all that and a bag of chips on the outside but a shark underneath. But the paper trail doesn't lie. The suspicious activity reports from her bank and the cast-off patterns on her shirt tell the only story the law needs to hear. As for the real Leo Reed, if he is alive, he would be in his late 30s today. He might be sitting in a coffee shop or driving a Toyota Camry, or perhaps even watching a true crime documentary about a debt paid in blood, never realizing that the child the world mourned in 1996 was him.